Hello YouTube, this is an Ace review, and today I've decided to have a look at the new real-time tactics game called Wargame Red Dragon. Now some of you are probably asking yourselves questions like, what the hell is Wargame Red Dragon? Why did they pick such a silly name? Why should I care? To answer, I will say that the second question is a little out of my league, but the answer to the first and third questions can be summed up by this. Okay, so we've established that this is a strategy, or more specifically, a real-time tactics game, and it is a modern warfare game. Well, sort of. Actually, the game deals with the historical time period of the later part of the Cold War, with NATO, led by the US, against the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact from 1975 to the early 90s. Believe it or not, this is actually the third game of the series, the previous two being Wargame European Escalation and Wargame Airland Battle. The series has effectively breathed some new fresh air into the RTS genre with a very healthy dose of realism, exceedingly epic fights, and an enormous variety of units. In fact, let me delve into just how detailed this game actually is by diving into the armory and showing you some of the stuff that you can use. So here in the armory you will see a whole mess of stats, and it might be a little intimidating for more mainstream gamers, and perhaps even some RTS vets. For example, how important are optics on a unit? Well, optics are actually very critical, as they allow you to spot enemy units, and without them, you can expect to get ambushed and utterly crushed, and you can lose to a vastly smaller and inferior army without them. Comparatively, stealth is how effective a unit is while hiding, and this stat is again very important, as it will reduce the ability for units to effectively ambush an enemy. Less obvious factors may be little things like how a specific weapon works. This is actually a very important factor for anti-air units, as those that use radar-based weapons have a counter in aircraft that carry anti-radar missiles. It can easily make short work of those units. A counter to this, however, can be to turn the radar or radar-based weapons off if you're paying enough attention. Because ammo is precious for each unit, you can actually order them not to use any specific weapon to conserve ammo for more high-priority targets, like having anti-tank units preserve their long-range missiles for more advanced tanks. It might feel a little overwhelming at first, but trust me, you'll get the hang of it easily enough. I should point out that you build your armies from decks, which allow you to pick and choose what specific units you want. This can be customized by selecting specific nations and coalitions like the US and the Commonwealth, specific formations like airborne and armored decks, and time periods, all of which giving their own advantages and disadvantages. Enough of the gameplay though, what about the story, you ask? Well, to start off, I would say that there are no main characters with voiceovers in the entire game. So, is there no story then? Well, sorta. The whole idea of the Wargame series was to use real historical events as a jumping-off point for how various nations could have gotten into major conflicts with each other, or how the Cold War could have gone hot. There is therefore no specific story, but a bunch of smaller ones specific to each campaign in the game. In my opinion, they do a decent job of explaining backstory. Here's an example.
November 3rd, 1978. Vietnam and the USSR signed a mutual defense treaty aimed at containing China's influence. December 25th, 1978. 2 months later, with Soviet support, Vietnam launches a full-scale invasion of Cambodia, China's ally. January 1st, 1979. Deng Xiaoping meets Jimmy Carter, seeking American support against Vietnam. February 15th, 1979. China terminates its 30-year-old Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance with the USSR. February 17th, 1979. China invades Vietnam and warns the USSR not to interfere. February 1979. Nonetheless, the USSR sends warships and naval troops to Vietnamese waters and calls in mechanized troops to the Sino-Soviet border. Late February 1979. With its offensive bogged down in Vietnam, China realizes it can't afford to let the USSR get the upper hand and stab it in the back. March 2nd, 1979. Taking advantage of the absence of a main naval squadron and the incomplete buildup of Soviet forces, the PLA launches a surprise attack. Their objective: seizing and destroying the main Soviet supply base at Vladivostok.
All things considered, even though there isn't much of a story with main characters or the sort of thing you would see in a play, the game does a good job of setting. Moving on from story though, the campaigns you are treated to are dynamic and persistent, with units gaining experience and becoming better. This isn't new to the series though, as Airland Battle had dynamic campaigns as well, but Red Dragon took the initiative to improve them. One improvement was that instead of getting a whole division, you could get certain parts of it, like, say, the anti-air detachment or one of the division's tank regiments, and combine those with other formations you already have in the game. Sadly, though, the special little abilities you could call on in the last game are absent, so there are no more tactical nuclear strikes. No, you never got to see nuke go off in the last game, but it was at least a very cool little feature. I think I should move on, though, to the biggest feature advertised in the game, the new naval battles. The naval battles are alright, but in my opinion they're not as good as the ground battles. The trouble is that there are not as many factors to consider. That isn't to say that they're bad or boring to watch, neither is true, but they are not as good as the land battles. I suspect part of the problem is the selection. All the ships that you have access to are destroyers or smaller class ships. This of course means no battleships, no carriers, and no subs, which is a bit of a letdown. I understand the reasons for this stem from the fact that most navies don't have carriers or battleships, that submarines are limited in getting orders while submerged, and that it would run the risk of making amphibious missions unbalanced, but that doesn't change the fact that it would at least been something more to see. Moving on from the naval battles, I should talk about the multiplayer and the AI. First of all, the multiplayer is fairly competent for the most part. I have seen some connection issues from people, but it isn't anything really game-breaking. You've got three main game types: Confrontation, which is RTS version of Team Deathmatch; Conquest, which is in practice a little like its Battlefield FPS cousin; and Economy, which is about saving up the most points. I should confess that this is one game where there is no shame losing to the AI. Your artificial opponents are perfectly adept at deploying recon, using smoke to cover their advance and softening up your divisions, and it will even try to flank you. Finishing up, I will say that this is an excellent title for the most part. There are a few letdowns and a few small bugs that don't get in the way of gameplay, those should be handled soon enough. Furthermore, I'll add the company has stated that they intend to release free DLC later on, with new units and at least one new campaign, which should be applauded in this day and age. Well, that pretty much covers everything I have to say about Wargame Red Dragon. It certainly is a must-buy that I can recommend if you're a strategy gamer. Other than that, though, I hope to hear from you guys soon. Ace out.